You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Eric Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Eric.
Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Johnson. Josh Mead is on assignment, and so are we. As I mentioned a few weeks ago with Josh, in Season 2, we wanted to bring to you some more testimonies, interviews, interesting stories from other missionaries. And so today we have just that, someone I've been wanting to interview for quite some time. Missionary Kyle Sheridan and his family serve in the country of Chile. And today, not only in Chile, but in Patagonia, Chile. And so we're going to learn a lot about places in the world that maybe you don't know a lot about, a very unique but special place. You're going to hear some interesting and awesome testimonies that the Lord has done in providing in some specific ways. We're also going to try to maybe cover some practical steps the Lord has helped guide Brother Kyle and his family, maybe even during difficult times. And then if you're good and you listen to the end, you might even get a special treat to hear Brother Kyle singing with the wonderful voice the Lord has given him. But first of all, let's introduce you to Kyle. Kyle, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, Eric, first-time caller, long-time listener here. Love the podcast and thankful to be with you. You and Josh do a great job. Glad to be with you. I was reading about your ministry recently, about the baptisms you had and the youth conference coming up. Excited about how the Lord's using you on the island. And I love the material on the podcast. It's been a blessing to me. Enjoy hearing that.
Well, we brought Kyle on to be our promoter, and so we appreciate that, Kyle, for that good announcement there. Appreciate those kind words, and we do enjoy. Kyle has been, from the very beginning, one of those guys that listens and reaches out, so that really encourages us. We want to make sure that more than just our moms are listening, and so that's good to know. So today, but we're here to find out about Kyle. Very excited. I think Kyle and I may have spoke one or two times before. Never met Kyle yet, just virtually. But I've been very aware of his ministry for a number of years. And specifically, I was mentioning to Kyle early in our phone call that my family, my kids, my wife, they really enjoy not only reading missionary biographies and missionary letters, but specifically missionaries who are in far ends of the world, places they like to learn about. And today we're going to learn about that. But before we get into the field where Kyle serves with his wife and his children, let's find out a little more about Kyle. Kyle, tell us about you, where you grew up, where your wife grew up, where you kind of met each other. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we're both from Southern California. And born and raised in Southern California, raised by two wonderful parents, Pat and Rosalind Sheridan, my mom and dad. And they probably will be the only people I invite that listen to this. So hi, Mom and Dad. And I came to faith in Christ when I was 17 years old. And I met my beautiful wife, Annie, in my freshman year of Bible college. At that time, we dated for 3 years during college. And before graduating, I had read about missionary Bob Hughes, wonderful short little biography about him, where he decided, after he had fought in the Philippines and he came back and went to Bible college and said, the day I graduate, I'm moving to the mission field. And so I got this crazy idea in my head, the day I graduate, I'm going to the mission field. And I told Annie, I said, I had already proposed to her a few times and she had turned me down. Can you imagine that? What a lack of discernment.
If at first you don't succeed, try again, right?
Yeah. As my pastor always says, I got the girl, and that's what counts, right?
Exactly.
So I was about to graduate, and I told her, I'm going to either go to Chile with you or I'm going to go without you. And she said, you're going to go without me. And so we ended up after 3 years. And then I moved to Chile as a single missionary in 2010. And helped start a church with Jason Holt, who's a missionary in Santiago, Chile. Yes. And it was when I was in Chile that Annie decided she wanted to marry me. And so I got a message from her that said she wanted to marry me, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, after so many years of waiting and praying and fasting and whatever, and I had longed for this for so long. And I said to her, go talk to your dad and make sure we still have his blessing. I'll talk to my parents, you go home. And I knew that we still had everyone's blessings because, the Lord was in our relationship from the beginning, and our parents were involved in everything. And so I called my dad. My dad was in the garden working on his garden. And I said, Dad, I need you to do me a favor. He said, okay, well, what do you need? I mean, can I change my clothes and shower? You know, I'm in my grubbies, he said. And I said, no, Dad, I need you to do something fast before Annie changes her mind. I said, up in my old bedroom, I've got an engagement ring hidden in the dresser. And I said, I need you to go get the engagement ring, and I need you to drive to my pastor's house, because Annie's dad is our pastor. I said, I need you to drive to my pastor's house, and I need you to propose to Annie for me. And so I had been turned down so many times that I decided to send in the reinforcements. And that's how we got engaged. I was in Chile and Annie was in California, and my dad got her to say yes finally. So I went back to California after about a year in Chile, and we got married. And then within just a few weeks, we found out we were expecting our first boy, Micah. And when Micah, at that time, I decided to do a year of deputation because, you know, imagine that. It's really good if you have funds when you go to the mission field. And so I did a year of deputation.
Quite good.
Yeah. And, we came when our son was about 3 months old, and arrived to Santiago. We were there for about a month, and we came down to Patagonia in southern Chile, where we're serving now. And here the Lord's given us 3 more kids. We've got Patrick, second oldest, and Abigail, and our youngest is Hudson.
Well, that is I've heard a lot of stories about how people got engaged. Never heard that one. That's a first. Okay, so we'll put that back in our minds. Remember that one. But the most important thing is that she said yes, and she stayed married to you, and you have 4 kids now, right? So praise the Lord for that.
I got the girl. You know,
exactly.
We're still married. She's never thought about divorce before, but I think she has thought about killing me a few times. But yeah, happily married here in Patagonia.
All right. Well, before we get onto the field and ministries, let's back up just a second and let's ask. I want to find out about. You said you got saved when you were 17 and then went to Bible college, but where along the way did you feel the Lord's calling specifically into being a missionary? And then how did you really feel the Lord's specific calling to that part of the world?
Sure. Well, sometimes I'll tell this story, especially when I'm preaching in Mexican churches or in California. I'll say one night I went to the grocery store and I bought one jalapeno, one chili pepper, and I put it in the refrigerator. And the next morning I woke up and there were hundreds of chilies in the refrigerator. Wow. And I knew that the Lord had called me to Chile. No, I of course am joking. Don't cut me off the call, but I'll admit I'm one of those weirdos who doesn't believe in a call to missions. And I'm not vehemently opposed to the concept or anything. It just isn't something that I lived. And it's not something that I impose on others who might desire the office of a bishop. I never experienced some sort of like mystical call or anything like that to the mission field. I surrendered my life to Jesus and walked with him each day. It's kind of a long story. I had a moment of consecration in my life when I was in Guatemala for 3 months. And down on my knees, I told the Lord, I said, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And at that point, I had no idea what he would have me do. But I walked with the Lord each day. And like I said, it's kind of a long story, but he's ordered my steps to Patagonia. And I know 100% for sure. I was just one of those who volunteered and said, here am I, Lord, send me. And he took me up on the offer. And of course, if what I'm saying disagrees, if you're listening and what I'm saying disagrees with what your pastor has taught you, just ignore me because I don't know anything. And he's definitely right.
Well, I think it's neat. That's a great testimony. I'm reminded about Dr. Sisk used to always say, you know, well, if you're not sure if you're called to mission field and you go, I think God will still forgive you, right? You know, and I think it's also interesting because this is what we're going to delve into a little bit more is that, you know, this maybe you didn't feel some, like you said, mystical calling. And I don't know that anybody really does. But I will say that you did put yourself in positions where the Lord would call you, especially to these Spanish-speaking countries. You mentioned you grew up in Southern California, and you and I were talking, you were learning Spanish as a young man, but tell us how you developed even more than just learning in high school, because you can't just go to the mission field and be very effective if you haven't prepared. And one of the most, as we've talked on this podcast many times, one of the most important things to do besides preparing yourself spiritually is preparing yourself with another language. So tell us a little bit how you could go to places like Guatemala and speak Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember exactly who said it. I seem to think it was related to Hudson Taylor, but he spoke about how can you expect the Lord to speak to these people in their language if he doesn't speak to you in their language? And it was very important to me to learn Spanish, not for spiritual reasons at first. In fact, I started learning Spanish before I was saved, and thankful to my mom for that. In California at the time, in order to go to a Cal State university, you had to have 4 semesters of a foreign language, and to go to a UC, you had to have 6 semesters. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to take one of the cool languages. I'm going to take Japanese or French, to impress the girls. Maybe Annie would have accepted my proposal the first time if I knew French, And so my mom said, no way. If you're going to get a good job in California, you need to be bilingual. You need to know Spanish. So my mom had me take Spanish, and I ended up taking 4 years, 8 semesters of Spanish in high school in Orange County, North Orange County. And after that, I took a year of college Spanish in community college or whatever. And when I went to Bible college, I had the distinct blessing of my parents covering the cost of college. But I didn't want to be lazy, and I decided I'm going to work as if I was paying for Bible college. So I would work, I'd go to school all day, then I'd go to work, and then stay up late doing homework and all that. I would save my money, and I would, every single summer, I would travel to Latin America. I spent 3 months in Costa Rica. I spent a total of 6 months in Guatemala. I spent about 3 months in Mexico. I spent 3 months in Chile. I'm not sure if I'm missing any in there. But the reason why I decided to do that was because when I was kind of curious and sort of investigating missions and thinking maybe God's leading me into this, I don't know. I talked to a man who mentored me, a dear friend. His name is Dustin Reinhardt. Dustin is a missionary in northern Chile.
Okay.
Chile's so long that Dustin's probably closer to you on the island than he is to me here in Patagonia. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but probably not that much. And so Dustin, he told me 2 things. He said, I think missionaries make 2 big errors when they're getting ready for the mission field. He said, number 1, he says, I think they spend too long on deputation. He said, I think they spend too long on deputation. And so if you're ever a missionary, don't spend that long on deputation. And the second thing he said was, they know where they're going to be a missionary. And they know the language that's spoken in the place they're going to be a missionary. And they've got 2-3 years of preparation and deputation and all that to start learning that language. And he said, if it's possible, and if you're going to serve the Lord in a Spanish place, I think you should learn Spanish first. I was a captain of the wrestling team in high school, and I had a trainer who told me, he said, he gave me a percentage. I don't know, I'm going to make it up because I don't remember. So he said, only 1% of people in the world write down their goals. And then he said, but if you write down a goal, you have a certain percentage of possibility to be able to achieve that goal. So I wrote down the goal that my first week on the mission field, I'm going to preach in Spanish, I'm going to soul win into Spanish, and I'm going to disciple in Spanish. And so that was kind of the goal I set, and I just went I went as hard as I could towards that. And I wanted to make sure that first term on the field, I could just hit the ground running. And so that's what I did. The first week I was in Chile, I got to preach, I got to go soul winning, and I got to start discipleship. And then the next week I started teaching in a Bible college. And so I'm thankful the Lord allowed me to learn Spanish. When I was in college, I actually got a job at Chick Publications. If you've ever seen those little comic book tracks, I translator for Chick Tracks, translating the website from English to Spanish. And so that's a little bit of how I learned Spanish.
That's amazing. And, that shows a great interest to have a fruitful ministry in the future, understanding the things that, really learning a language is not always that much fun. It can be if you like that kind of thing, and you can make it fun, but it does require hard work. There's no way around that. And so that's a great testimony to preparing yourself before you got to the mission field. Now, let's find out a little bit about Patagonia. I'm assuming with your time, Jason, in Chile, you've probably learned more about the country of Chile and started learning maybe where in the country the Lord could use you. So how did he direct your steps specifically to Patagonia? And tell us a little bit about Patagonia, where I imagine a lot of people listening don't know a ton about Patagonia.
Sure. Yeah, I'll get into that. I received a wonderful Bible college education. I really appreciated it. However, the focus was kind of more in established ministries, which I think is probably the case. I had never planted a church. And one thing I'm eternally grateful for during my time with Jason and the Chilean pastors that he works with is that I got to observe what it looks like to give birth to a brand new church that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And that's something that I had never learned. And so I'm very grateful for that. I actually knew I was coming to Patagonia before I went to work with Jason.
Okay.
And but my mentor said, you can't go to Patagonia as a single man. And Annie and I had just broken up. And so that was when I decided kind of just to go. It was more like an internship this year there with Brother Holt. But Patagonia, it's a large region, and it spans 2 countries. So it makes up the southern tip of South America, and it's the southernmost parts of both Chile and Argentina. We get to serve Jesus on the Chilean side. And of course, our seasons are flipped. You all there are coming out of summer, right? We're coming out of winter. We had snow this week, as I was mentioning on our call earlier. One of the one unique aspect about our field is that where we are, a lot of people here consider Patagonia to be like one unit. And there's a lot of rivalry between Chile and Argentina, but that's kind of more up north between Santiago and Buenos Aires. But where we're at, we have a wonderful relationship with the Argentine side. And the place where we're at, it's mostly Chilean culture, but with a heavy dose of Argentine language, customs, and traditions, which is very cool. And I appreciate that. I enjoy learning that. Here's an interesting detail about Patagonia. If your kids don't know this, they'll like this. It is less densely populated than the Sahara Desert. Wow. And so people here are really spread out. The terrain is crazy. 4 hours north of us, we've got an iceberg. And 4 hours below us, we've got an iceberg. And the terrain here is very interesting. It's hard to get around. The roads aren't always the best. And the place that we live, our city, is very isolated. You can only get here either by boat, by plane, or through a very long trip going through Argentina. Wow. And so it's an interesting place that we live, and it's a vast region with an incredible need for laborers. And so we are praying for that. And I'd ask that anyone hearing my voice right now would stop and pray and ask the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into his harvest.
Well, that's exciting. And I can see the challenge if you have something that's so spread out to, the challenge of starting a church with enough people and then be able to reach people. And so tell us a little bit about that. You got down there, you're married now. You arrived to the Patagonia area you're going to serve. And how do what's the first thing you start doing as far as ministry there?
Sure. Well, ministry is all about people. A lot of times we'll get to the field and we'll think, I need to get a building. But buildings are great, but buildings aren't that important, really. I mean, if you're not in Patagonia, you can start a church under a tree. It doesn't really matter. Here, it's a little cold for that. But the first thing we said, we need to get people. And our goal has always been to make consecrated disciples, and consecrated disciples who in turn will make consecrated disciples. That's what we want. We soul win because we want to win people who will become soul winners. And our ministry is heavily involved in every single day in one-on-one discipleship. And we do that because we want these people then in turn to do one-on-one discipleship with others. And we've planted a church in the city of Coyhaique, it's called Bible Baptist Church of Coyhaique, or Iglesia Bíblica Bautista de Coyhaique. And it's the capital of the 11th region of Chile. And we started this church with the desire to have this church give birth to other churches. We want to train, our goal is to train church planters who will train church planters. We're in an exciting time in our ministry. The first few years were very slow numerically. And so one by one, we began to see people added. But I remember in the first several years, probably even 4 or 5 years into it, we were still having church services sometimes once a week where nobody showed up. And it was difficult, to be honest, very, very hard at that point. But I spoke to another missionary about that one time, and I said, our attendance last week was amazing. We had so many people. And then yesterday, we didn't have a single person show up. And he said to me, if you put your eyes on the harvest, it can get discouraging. But if you keep your eyes on the Lord of the harvest, your spirits will always be lifted. And that's just kind of been my motto, and something that we've stuck to. And we stuck to it. And now each Sunday there's about 80 people that we've won to Christ and discipled, and who are congregating together. And it's been exciting times. We've got those who are interested in full-time ministry. I'm training some for ministry. I had designed a 7-semester college level Bible Institute program. And that's for a young man that I'm training for ministry. His name's Nacho for short, or Ignacio. Americans always get such a laugh out of Nacho. I always forget that it's food and then I'll talk about him and people just start laughing.
Nacho Libre.
So, yeah, that's funny. I went to pick him up yesterday on the way to a church service and a church plant that we're doing, and to tell him that we were leaving the house, I went, Nacho. I said, so. Well, now everyone knows that we're worldly. Can we edit that out? Just kidding.
They better know.
Yeah, right. We've finished 3 semesters of the Bible Institute, which is really exciting. It's a lot of work. We've had different students join at different times. We've had as many as 15 in the second semester. And right now, we've got 3 very serious men who I think are going to be pastors. With other men that have expressed the desire, but they haven't necessarily taken that next step yet. And currently, just in the last several months, we've ventured into planting another church in the second largest city here in our region, and that city is called Puerto Aysén. And so we're making a trip once a week out there each week, and holding services now on Thursday nights. So that's pretty exciting.
That's tremendous. That's really great testimony to see what the Lord's doing there. All right, Kyle, let's talk a little bit about something really exciting. My wife shared this testimony of yours with me a number of months back when she first read it. I think it was in one of your prayer letters or an update. And I'm not going to mess up. I hate people who mess up the story and tell all the wrong things. I'm kind of an exact person, but it is an amazing story. So you can take a little bit of time here. Explain to us how you guys with your church were looking for a piece of property. I believe you found a very specific place that's pretty exciting. And then more importantly, after you found this place, how the Lord literally in a miraculous and very unique way started meeting that provision. Why don't you explain the background and take a little bit of time?
Sure. We could do a whole podcast on how God has miraculously provided for us since we came to the field, or since I came single and up until this point in time. I'll give this small detail as an introduction. We were taught a philosophy, and like I said, if this goes against what you've learned from your mission board and your pastor and things like that,
I'll edit it out. I'll just take it out.
please use wisdom and follow your counselors. But we were taught a philosophy to set a date, not a dollar, and that's what we were taught by Brother Jack Baskin. And so I clung to it, and I said, all right, we're going to do it. I prayed about a time, and I just went to the field by faith. And not that if you don't do it that way, you're not going by faith, but that's what we decided to do. And so we came to I talked to Jason Holt, and I said, how much money do you think that we would need to function in Chile, in Patagonia? It's one of the most expensive parts of the country. And so he gave me a figure, and I prayed, and I said, Lord, we're going to go to the field in a year. I believe that's when you want us to go. And would you give us that figure? And when we came to the field, and so Jason had given us a figure, and he said, you're not going to have much money for ministry funds, but that's just going to kind of cover your family. And when we came to the field, we came with 40% of that figure. And so we came with what a lot of people would call being extremely undersupported. And we got to work, and within just a few months, the new church where we were winning people and discipling them was fully independent of us financially. They were paying all their own bills. And on top of that, lots of extra money was coming in the offerings. And so the church, before long, after 6 years, the church was able to purchase their own building, a new building, with 100% Chilean funds. And that was before we had taken our first furlough in 2019, when we finished raising our support. And we got up to, a regular level of support. But the church here purchased their own building, and that building got too small for us. And so we began to pray that we'd be able to find a new building. And my theme verse for the story that you've asked about is Psalm 50 and verse 10, that says, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. The church year had been praying and asking God to provide for the purchase of specifically a non-operational restaurant as a new home for the congregation on the size of a media hectarea. And I'm thinking, I don't even know if a half hectare is a word, but it's I did the math, and it's like a few acres. And so just this large property. And we prayed about it, and all of the leadership, we got together, every man who's a member of the church, and there was 100% unity that everybody wanted to go forward with this purchase. And so what we did was we signed a contract where we had to pay 1/4 of the price. The price was $242,000. So we had to pay 1/4 of the price, and then we would have 12 months to pay the remaining 3/4, or we lose the money that we had put down. And so a pastor of a supporting church, and also a man who's been like a mentor to me, who's forbidden me to share his name when I tell this story. He says, he calls me and he says, hey, how much money do you guys still need for the purchase? And at that point, we had done some fundraising here locally and stateside with some of our partners. And I told him, we need $100,000. We still need $100,000. The Chilean believers here and our ministry partners, we've been able to raise $142,000. And so the pastor, he mentioned the need to their church family. They're a praying church, and so they're always praying for us, and they got our back in that way. And so it was a Sunday evening service, and he offered this prayer request. Several weeks later, he contacts me and he says, "Can you call me?" And when I called him, he says to me, "Are you sitting down?" And that can be either a good sign or a bad sign, right?
Sure.
He proceeded to tell me an unfathomable story. A man had walked into their service that night and handed him a bag. The pastor had never seen this man before, nor had he ever attended services. The man had never seen the pastor before.
Mm.
And if he hands him the bag, he says, "Let's pay for that building in Chile." Taken back, the pastor says, "Who are you? And how do you know about our missionaries' need in Chile?" The man told him that morning he had been working his cattle, and he got onto YouTube and he watched a sermon from a church, a local church, and it was this church. It was a Sunday morning service. And he enjoyed it so much that he just let it keep going. And YouTube put on the following sermon, which was that Sunday night service. It was the services from weeks earlier when the pastor had mentioned the need here in Patagonia. And God put it on this man's heart to generously give towards the project. And the bag that he handed the pastor had $100,000 cash in it.
Wow.
Only God could do that. And I praise him for it. This man works in cattle. And of course, I'm reminded that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. We shared that momentous news with the church, and there was hardly a dry eye. And we just were weeping. And I mean, we'd been working, fundraising and praying. And we just praised the Lord together and sang his praises for hours. We sang praises for hours. We must have sung at least 50 hymns as we just lifted up our voices in praise and worship and just thanking the Lord. And so that's just one of the amazing stories of how we've seen God provide for his work here in Patagonia.
Well, that's not only one of the stories, that's one of the best stories you're ever going to hear. I think as missionaries, we love hearing those stories. I know Christians love hearing it, but as missionaries, when you go through it and you have spiritual dreams that the Lord gives you and you wonder how the Lord's going to provide, and when he does, you rejoice and you have that same kind of kinship and fraternity with another brother that I remember I don't know how many people we've told that story to. Like, I remember telling my mom, who's a Christian, about that story, and she's like, "You gotta be kidding." I'm like, "No, this really happened." Like, that's an amazing story. And the great part of it is, the Lord gets all the credit. There was no manipulation, there's no obligation. That's the kind of stories that really, like you mentioned, encourage people who are literally in the corner of the world.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Missionary Perspective Podcast. Be sure to like and share with your friends if you've been blessed by this episode. And join us next week as we conclude our interview with missionary Sheridan to Patagonia, Chile.